Hello students, in the last video we studied the epistemology of Indian philosophies, and we also studied about the term epistemology and about it in detail. Now we are going to study the epistemology of Western philosophies. Western philosophy has ancient, medieval, and modern eras. The ancient era includes the work of Greek and Roman thinkers, some of whom were influenced by ideas developed much earlier in Egypt and Mesopotamia. During the ancient era, Greek philosophy was the most creative. The Romans derived most of their thought from it and built upon it, but they did not add much that was new. So Western philosophy began by answering some of the very basic philosophical problems and questions that general people had about life. But before we begin by classification of the various different philosophies, let us divide the Western philosophy into three major time periods, which are ancient, medieval, and modern. So the ancient philosophy it can be seen as synonymous with Greek philosophy, and the period it covers is between 600 to 400 AD. So this period is categorized further into three sections: the pro-Socratic philosophy, then Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and thirdly we've got Greco-Roman philosophy. Medieval philosophy ranges from a time period of 400 to 1500 AD. It made much use of Plato and Aristotle and was heavily influenced by Christianity, since it began about 4th century with St. Augustine and ended in the 15th century. Augustine identified the eternal ideas of Plato with truths that came from God. Augustine taught that the immortality of human soul can be proved by its possession of eternal truths. Thirdly, modern philosophy is ranges from Bacon to Kant, post-Kantian philosophy included. So, modern philosophy represents in most respects a break with thought dominated by Christianity. The Renaissance, the rise of humanism, and Enlightenment laid the foundation for this way of philosophy has developed since 1500. From 1500, philosophy took so many twists and turns that it cannot be defined by any one approach. The ideas of Plato, Aristotle, and others still had to be dealt with, but mostly for their relation to practical thinking. Metaphysics still had its advocates, as it does today, but many schools of thought denied its validity. Early in the modern period, Francis Bacon was an ardent advocate of the new learning. He held that knowledge cannot be based on accepted authorities but must begin with experience and proceed with induction to general principles. He helped lay the foundation for British empirism, one of the main schools of modern philosophy. Now, methods of Western philosophy, the various methods, broadly, they can be classified into, say, 7 methods. Let's begin with them. So, the first one is dogmatism, which is a method of thinking which consists in assuming certain fundamental principles as self evident without explanation or proof and deducing conclusions from these unapproved premises. It carries on its investigations without a previous criticism of uses. Then we have empiricism. So, all knowledge, whether scientific or philosophical, entirely built upon sensations and materials derived from sensations. It holds that the mind of every man at the time of birth is like a blank sheet of white paper and everything is learned later on. So, we've already just discussed that it was also propagated by Bacon, but other people who have mentioned this are, are Hume, Mill, Bain, and so many more. Thirdly, we have skepticism, which results from carrying empiricism to its most extreme and consistent form. It follows that we cannot have any understanding realities outside of and apart from our own sensations and feelings, but also any certain knowledge that such things exist at all. Hence, our idea of substances, mind, matter, God cannot be known for certain to correspond to realities. Not only can we know nothing about the real nature of such metaphysical or transcendental realities, but also we cannot even know for certain that they have any existence. So, Spencer, Hume, Mill advocate this doctrine. Fourthly, we have criticism, which is a method which bases all philosophical speculation upon critical inquiry into nature, origin, and limits of knowledge. Kant is a great advocate of this critical method. Then we have rationalism, which consists in showing that sensations and feelings can only give the materials of knowledge, and that such materials do not constitute knowledge unless they are interpreted by a reason. So, the criticism of Kant then is a form of rationalism. Likewise, some of the dogmatic systems may be regarded as forms of rationalism. Then we have dialectical method. According to Hegel, the proper method of philosophy is dialectic. This is a natural method of philosophical thinking. It is a commonplace experience that when we think over a problem, we arrive at a certain positive facts. This is thesis. Now, after some time, we come to know some facts which are contradictory to the thesis. This is antithesis. Thesis and antithesis cannot live together for long, hence, they are synthesized into a synthesis. So, this synthesis arrived through antithesis is more comprehensive than the original thesis. Lastly, the seventh method of Western philosophy is modern method. Now, pragmatists they adopted the pragmatic method. The new realists adopt the method of intellectual analysis. The logical positivists adopt the method of linguistic analysis and empirical verification. The naturalists adopt the naturalistic methods of observation and experiment, so and so. Now, we also have criticism of Indian and Western philosophies, but before jumping on to that, let's discuss some differences or the comparison between Indian and Western philosophy. Now, it can be very clearly seen that the aim of Indian philosophy is liberation of the individual, while that of Western philosophy is intellectual curiosity about epistemology or metaphysical aspects. The goal of Indian philosophy is moksha or nirvana in the case of Buddhism and Jainism in the end of life, while Western philosophy's goal was to discover the grounds of scientific truth and the limits to man's ability. One more interesting point is that Indian philosophy is inner dependent, while Western philosophy is very outer dependent. We have already discussed the various schools of philosophy, of Indian philosophy, and the major schools of Western philosophy are idealism, humanism, naturalism, pragmatism, and realism. Before we discuss these in depth, let's just discuss a few more points related to school of Western philosophy. So, there are a number of ways in which the field of educational philosophy might be organized, whether for purpose of study or teaching. We have the following major schools of Western philosophy. Each school of thought has at least one philosopher who would be considered the forerunner of the school. For example, idealism is based on the early writings of Plato, realism is based on the thinking of Aristotle, and hence so forth. Behind every school and every teacher, there's a set of related beliefs about philosophy of education that influences what and how students are taught. A philosophy of education represents answers to questions about the purpose of schooling, a teacher's role, and what should be taught and by what methods. In detail, we are going to study each school of philosophy. We'll begin by discussing the meaning and various definitions given by various thinkers. We'll read the characteristics, we'll study the principles, forms, and lastly, we'll discuss the association of that particular school of thought with education and its impact on education as well. We will discuss these schools of Western philosophy in detail in the next video. Until then, if you have any doubt, feel free to contact us. The contact details have been provided below.